Tonight, fired by Zoom. 800 workers at P&O find out they've been sacked on the spot and replaced by agency workers.
Your employment is terminated with immediate effect on the grounds of redundancy. Your final day of employment is today.
The ferry operator has suspended all services, also making the headlines as COVID cases continue to rise as the NHS facing its worst week since the beginning of the pandemic. We hear of the desperate measures some families are taking as they deal with the rising cost of living. I'm Kellyanne Woodland in Edinburgh.
And I'm John Mackay in Glasgow. This is the STV News at 6.
Good evening. P&O Ferries has sacked 800 people and suspended all of its services. The company is understood to be replacing its staff with cheaper agency workers. Some employees learned the news through video calls. The RMT union is claiming that security guards with handcuffs are being used to remove crew who are refusing to leave their vessels.
The move has brought widespread condemnation with questions over its legality. One MP described P&O's actions as appalling. The company claims it cannot continue as a business in its current state. In a moment, we'll get further reaction from Westminster and hear from our special correspondent Bernard Ponsonby. But first, Sharon Frew is at Cairnryan, from where P&O Ferries sail to Northern Ireland.
On a normal day, there would be 7 sailings between here and Larne, but today this ferry went nowhere, like many in ports across the UK. It's not known how many staff are on board, but after learning of the redundancies, we're told unions told those working in vessels across the UK to stay put and remain where they are, to refuse to leave. We're now told that this ferry service will be suspended for the next 7 to 10 days. Now, that's not good news for staff or for those who rely on this route, including lorry drivers who told us this evening that they, like the workers, now face a waiting game. The European Highlander didn't leave Cairnryan this morning, the first sign something was wrong. By late this afternoon, only a few people could be seen on board. This was the moment 800 P&O staff learned they were being made redundant. The news delivered by a pre-recorded message on a Zoom call.
Therefore, I am sorry to inform you that this means your employment is terminated with immediate effect on the grounds of redundancy. Your final day of employment is today.
This breaks the law on consultation, redundancy rights and the ability to negotiate. That is an absolutely outrageous act by an outrageous company owned by oil billionaires from the Far East that are just determined to drive down terms and conditions and pay to the very bottom of the legal ladder, and that's exactly what they're trying to do today.
This video shows agency staff hired to replace workers. Unions had advised staff currently on P&O ships not to leave. P&O operates a main route between Scotland and Northern Ireland. At Larne, they've been told services will be redirected to Belfast for 1 week. Staff spoke of their shock.
2 lots of company representatives who turned out to be kind of security personnel and representing P&O were brought on board both vessels, in one in Cairnryan as well. It's a big shock. I have 4 kids, mortgage to pay.
P&O say its survival is dependent on making swift and significant changes now. Without this move, it said there is no future for P&O Ferries. Both the UK and Scottish governments are seeking urgent talks with the company.
I think it's absolutely appalling. In this day and age, for these employment practices to be used by any organisation, but particularly by a company which provide a vital route from Scotland to Larne, and for the local workers who work in that community, it's absolutely appalling that they've been treated in this way. And we as a government will work with the UK government and with trade unions and partners to ensure that staff get the support that they need. But ultimately, this didn't need to happen, and it shouldn't have happened.
Passengers booked onto this morning's sailings to Northern Ireland were told to use the Stena Line service at Stranraer. Others stranded in Larne say they've had to pay an extra £200 to get home.
We've had no communication whatsoever from P&O, not a dicky bird. We were supposed to be catching the 4 o'clock ferry from Larne, so obviously we'd be on our way to Larne at the moment. We've had no word from P&O to tell us anything.
The only main activity at Cairnlarne earlier was lorry drivers collecting freight from the car park. They, like P&O staff, uncertain of the future of this vital route. Sharon Frew, STV News.
Well, in the last hour, the issue was raised at Westminster. Let's cross to our correspondent, Catherine Sampson, for the very latest. Catherine.
Yeah, look, unions are saying that this move is absolutely scandalous. They want intervention from government. And, there has been fury, really, from politicians of all parties. This afternoon, the First Minister tweeted that she has been in touch with the CEO of P&O and expressed her utter disgust. In the last hour here, the Shipping Minister confirmed to MPs that he's also spoken to them. They said to him they will be suspending these services for 7 to 10 days. You can expect disruption, including on that Larne to Cairn-Ryan route. Now, he also said he's asked his officials to review all government contracts with P&O Ferries, which is actually owned by a company based in Dubai, as he condemned their approach as completely unacceptable.
I am extremely concerned and frankly angry at the way workers have been treated today by P&O. As a matter of urgency, I've asked my department to liaise closely with counterparts in the Department for Work and Pensions to ensure that workers are being signposted to the most relevant support, and I am intending to call the trade unions immediately after this statement to discuss the situation with them. There can be no doubt that the pandemic has had a devastating impact on the finances of many travel companies, including P&O. But while their finances are matters for them and them alone to take, I would have expected far better for the workers involved.
And Catherine, some more bad news about jobs today from the Department of Work and Pensions.
Yeah, the DWP, which runs job centres, administers benefits like universal credit, they've announced they're going to be closing dozens of their back offices around the UK. Now, the sites earmarked for closure in Scotland, most of these, there's one in Stirling, in Falkirk, some in Glasgow, Dundee. In most of these sites, there's a situation where you can be transferred to a nearby hub, so it's more of a transferring of jobs. There are 2, though, Aberdeen and Kirkcaldy, where that alternative route is not going to be an option. The PCS union in their briefing estimates around 165 jobs at risk between those 2.
All right, Catherine from Westminster, thanks very much.
To our special correspondent now. And Bernard, a lot of cross words today. It looks like this standoff between unions and P&O could be protracted.
Oh, absolutely. And what we have tonight is workers having effectively a sit-in on those ships. A sit-in and a work-in was the tactics employed by the workers of Upper Clyde shipbuilders on this river in 1971, and it forced a U-turn by Ted Heath's Conservative government. But as we've been hearing, cross-party anger. Why? Because there are employment laws in the United Kingdom which set out a statutory framework for employers consulting trade unions when employers want to take decisions of this kind. It doesn't appear that that has been followed, and therefore I would not be at all surprised if the unions go to the law courts in order to seek some sort of redress. Anger too, because P&O have taken quite a lot of public money in recent time. During the COVID pandemic, they took a lot of furlough money. And as we've been hearing earlier in the programme, the parent company which owns P&O, based in Dubai, it's not exactly short of cash, and indeed it pays tens of millions of pounds every year to shareholders. So for that reason, this issue is going to run and run in the weeks ahead.
Bernard, thank you. It's the worst week for the NHS since the pandemic began. That's the stark message from the Health Secretary, Hamza Yousaf. COVID case numbers have jumped by 37% in the last 7 days, with more than 2,000 people currently in hospital.
Those in the most deprived areas have been hit hardest over the course of the pandemic, and new research shows the death rates in these communities are disproportionately higher. Vanessa Taff has this report.
COVID has always hit those with underlying health problems hardest. In one of Glasgow's largest peripheral areas with higher rates of diabetes, blood pressure and obesity, it's had a devastating impact. 20% of this Easter House GP's patients are still unvaccinated. She knows the complications of COVID here.
Immunisation is great for that, but people are still left with those diseases and widening health inequalities, and in many ways but left behind. And I am worried that what COVID has shown is it's put a bit of spotlight on the health inequalities that have always been there. We just need to take notice, and there's other crises going to affect us.
The rise in case numbers comes as no surprise to locals.
I just found out somebody's got it. I just heard there was a lot in Easter House got it, so... How many variants is there? And when are we going to finish? I mean, it's going to take years to get by all this. My mother's 84, I'm 60. When are we ever going to see it? My mother's not going to see an end to it, I don't think.
So everybody's been touched with it, but me particularly, my dad's just been taken into hospital, and the hospital's rife with it. No visitors, so I'm a bit...
Over the course of this pandemic, the COVID death rate here in Easter House has been 72% higher than other areas across Scotland. Now, 9,000 households needed help accessing essentials and financial support. But on average, the good years of health men will have here, just 50 years, and for women, it's 53 years. In Holyrood, the Health Secretary said the current spike in COVID cases is causing fresh pressure for the health service.
In the conversations that I've had in the course of this week with health boards and my officials have had this week, many of the health boards are giving us the consistent message that they feel like this week is probably the toughest week that they've faced in the course of the pandemic.
Last week, almost 5,500 NHS staff members were off because of COVID. Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board is reinstating visiting restrictions at some wards at the Royal Alexandra Hospital in Paisley and at Glasgow's Royal Infirmary. More than 650 people are being treated for the virus at the sites. Health experts hope this will be the peak of the spike and that numbers will fall in a similar pattern to countries like Northern Ireland and Denmark. Vanessa Taff, STV News.
Well, our political editor Colin Mackay has been taking a closer look at the figures. Colin, should we be concerned?
Absolutely. Looking at all the health boards in Scotland, they're all more or less at the highest level of COVID patient occupancy that they've been throughout this pandemic. 2,038 people in hospital with COVID overnight. That's the second highest it's been in the last couple of years in Scotland. Now, at the COVID Recovery Committee this morning, you heard the Health Secretary, but also the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, said that the NHS in Scotland had come closer than ever to being overrun during Omicron throughout this whole 2-year period. So he knows that it's a risk, scrapping most of the remaining restrictions on Monday. Now, if you look at schools, it's going up again in schools. 32,500 kids off sick on Tuesday. Last year, 1 million pupil school days were lost to COVID. And if you go back to Easter House, much worse in most deprived areas of Scotland like that than it is in the least deprived. Twice as bad in those areas. So given what we've seen over the last 2 years, for the Health Secretary to say that this could be the worst week ever for the NHS in Scotland is really quite something.
Right, Colin, from the Scottish Parliament, thanks very much.
Ukrainians living in Scotland have called for stronger military support for their country against the Russian invasion. At a rally in Edinburgh attended by politicians from all the main parties, speakers demanded action rather than just words.
It comes amid intensive bombing of the Ukrainian city of Mariupol, including a theatre where civilians were sheltering. Here's our senior reporter, Gordon Cree.
A traditional Ukrainian song outside Parliament, watched by a cross-party group who came from inside it. But there's now a change in the tune they're hearing. No longer are these events simply about solidarity, but a clear message: more has to be done. For Allah, that could mean returning to Ukraine and getting directly involved.
Lots of volunteering people. I would like to be one of them. If there is a chance, I might step and to be there in person to protect my own homeland. If not, I will continue to do here to let people know the truth.
So you're saying you're considering going out there to fight?
I'm still thinking if there is going to be getting anyhow worse, I have no choice to go and to protect my homeland.
The pictures from the southeastern city of Mariupol only add to that sense of urgency. A theatre being used as a shelter was bombed. Up to 1,000 people were in the basement, which fortunately seems intact. The shelling continues. The city is cut off, in fear and without supplies.
Perpetuation of war crimes.
Back at the rally in Edinburgh, calls for more military help to put a stop to this.
As we see with many other conflicts that Russia has started, right, it can go on for centuries, and I think there is a question of responsibility here that people who are privileged enough to live in countries where they don't have bombs falling on themselves right now, to stop this and to prevent this from turning into like an ongoing big mess.
This afternoon, councillors voted to award the Freedom of Edinburgh to Ukraine's President Zelensky and to Kyiv's Mayor Klitschko, a symbolic gesture of support which was passed unanimously. Gordon Cree, STV News, Edinburgh.
A spate of recent tragedies have served as a grim reminder of the dangers of Scotland's hills. Mountain rescue volunteers are reminding people to plan ahead before venturing out. Kay Nicholson will have a report on their life-saving work on Scotland Tonight at 8:30 p.m.
Now, the rising cost of living is hitting across the board, but for those on low incomes, it's already having disastrous consequences. New research by the Trussell Trust found a third of Scots on universal credit fell into debt over the winter because they couldn't afford their bills. More than 160,000 are currently going without food. Breaking that down, 1 in 3 of those particular people said they've had at least one day in the last month when they've eaten nothing at all or only had one meal. 1 in 6 of them visited a food bank at least once since December. And 1 in 3 has not been able to heat their home for more than 4 days over the last month because they can't afford to.
Charities dealing with the fallout say they are inundated with pleas for help to provide basic clothing, bedding, food and toiletries to help them get by. Laura Boyd visited 2 organisations which have seen a sharp increase in the number of people seeking their help.
The family are experiencing severe anxiety around the cost of fuel to the point that they've turned everything off. They haven't had showers in 2 weeks because mum is so worried to turn the heating on. This means that the eldest child has stopped going to school because he's extremely self-conscious about personal hygiene and being bullied as a result. They also have no access to basic toiletries and are sharing one towel when they have a cold wash in the sink.
Just one of the many referral letters Aber Necessities deals with on a daily basis.
And because the house is cold, we've got some nice cosy blankets.
The Aberdeen-based charity provides essential and basic necessities for families in need, and the increase in the number of people requesting their help is greater than ever before.
Over the period of lockdown, we saw a 900% increase. We thought after, restrictions lifted, things would calm down a little bit, but in fact it's been the complete opposite. And we're seeing more and more requests for assistance with gas and electricity. Also things like blankets and hot water bottles and things, just to try and help people stay a bit warmer for longer.
Applications for Aber Necessities help largely come through healthcare professionals.
We, as family nurses, come across so many families who are just struggling to put food on the table, let alone clothe their children. So clothes and nappies and all sorts of things that are provided by Aber Necessities are such a massive help to the families I work with.
My family nurse told me about them when I was struggling for money before my son was born, just to get some stuff that I couldn't buy for him. They helped me out a lot.
And the cost of living is rising. Has that affected you?
Definitely, it's because of how much it's costing me on my shopping and my bills and stuff. I've got barely left with anything. It's good knowing that if it gets to a point where I'm really struggling, I can get in touch with my family nurse and tell her, and I know that I'll get what I need.
Aber Necessities isn't the only organisation like this seeing an increase in demand for their services at the moment. Across the country, others are the same, including Babes in the Wood in Stirling.
We know from our community partnerships that a lot of the times these referrals are going out to families where there are two parents are working, but with the sharp cost of living rises that we're seeing, they're just needing a wee bit of extra help, whether it is for toys, clothes or equipment.
The referrals are all anonymous. Nobody needs to know where it's coming from. It's very confidential, but it's a support to the families when we take the items to them.
Babes in the Wood relies on donations of items and money from the public, but it also has a shop which sells pre-loved goods and helps fund their work.
So we use Babes in the Wood because it supports all your local families, but also when we come in, we can pick up amazing bargains as well.
We're certainly seeing a higher footfall. Potentially it's families who haven't needed to shop from a pre-loved store in the past are now looking at that as a potential option just to help them to meet the needs of their children, but in a more financially viable way.
Both Babes in the Wood and Arbor Necessities are preparing for their toughest months yet, as the increasing cost of fuel, heating and everyday essentials will see more turn to them for help.
And that's heartbreaking. In this sector, in the third sector, you don't want to be busy. You don't want to see a rise in applications or a rise in people needing your services, but that's exactly what we're seeing.
It can be quite a confronting position to be in when we're working to provide these packs day in, day out, but what we choose to focus on is that when there is a need, we're able to meet it.
Laura Boyd, STV News.
Other stories across the West. A large fire that devastated a former hospital in Paisley was caused by reckless behaviour, according to police. Firefighters were called to the blaze at the Old Royal Alexandra Infirmary just before 8 o'clock last night. They were still at the scene this morning. There were no reports of any casualties. Electric vehicle drivers will be able to boost their batteries at more spots in Glasgow after the City Council announced a further 164 stations will be installed. Funding is coming from the Scottish Government and will add to the 268 charging points already in use across the city. Joe Farrow has the weather and it's beginning to look good.
Hello, there's going to be a lot of fine and settled weather over the next few days. And as the breeze comes around towards the south and some sunshine by Saturday, we'll see temperatures well up into the teens. Let's have a look at that forecast.
Today's outlook is becoming more and more unsettled. TUI Blue Hotels sponsor STV Weather.
Hello, we saw some clear blue skies and sunshine today until the bands of heavy showers worked their way in from the west. And those showers continue to push their way across Scotland as we go through this evening, but pressure is rising. So tonight the showers will fade, we'll see the winds easing off, and as it becomes clear and also dry, the temperatures fall away. So down to around freezing, and there will be a widespread frost as we head into Friday. Temperatures through the central belt around 2 or 3 Celsius, but more rural spots will fall down below freezing. So it means a chilly start on Friday, but again, we've got the blue skies and also the sunshine. So fine and dry, and that weather will last even as we go into the weekend. After the sunny start, there will be a bit more high cloud edging its way in from the west as we go through the day, so the sunshine turning more milky, but it stays dry, and with a light southerly wind, we'll see temperatures around 12 or 13 Celsius. So high pressures nearby for the weekend. That means settled, dry weather, plenty of sunshine and feeling much warmer, particularly for Glasgow, up to around 17 Celsius. 1 or 2 spots may reach 18 across western areas. A little bit cooler though across the east coast, but this fine, dry and bright weather will last even as we go into Sunday with perhaps a bit more cloud.
TUI Blue Hotels sponsor STV Weather.
Some breaking news. The Home Secretary Priti Patel has released a statement to say the Dnipro orphans will be allowed into the UK. Efforts to ensure their swift arrival are underway.
We're back again tomorrow at 6. Join us then if you can. We'll see you later.
Good night.